这边应该就不会是吧？刚刚是因为
还好，我的 nightmare 就是一开节目之后一上去，然后就所有的私人在做的东西都被曝光，说那个去哪边呢？
我也是超害怕，但是通常接上去会是那个叫什么 mode 那个 lecture mode。
应该是
你会换一个 mode。
对，上面有一个是定规定他要用那个 mode。就所以
哦，
不过他会一些
哇，这么 professional。
因为那个有 streaming。
哦，是。
所以麻烦了。
好吧，那我看一下。
跟线上的观众朋友打声招
呼。你可能要赶快换一下。
哦 no， 这就是我的那边。
还好啊，还好，看起来
很干净。
那个线上的朋友们在这里。
哦 ，hello。
在这里。
线上。
这么恐怖。这样可以吧 ？OK， 这样可以了。
OK， 那我也许就很快开场一下。
那线上的朋友看得到吗？你要不要看？
你说看我吗？我看得到，不，我在这边 OK， 只看得到我的肚子而已。
背后。对，
就很有特色。
这边应该可以看得到，对，我这边坐一下就好了。今天其实非常高兴能邀请到傅云，那我们今天算是中途拦截把你邀请过来。那我想在疫情算是不算真正结束，但到这时候我们很高兴有机会能更多这个实体的演讲。那傅云刚好这一次跟家人刚好到亚洲、台湾啊、中国啦，到时候又要到欧洲去的一些行程哈。那特别邀请傅云过来。那傅云他原本是在那个新南威尔斯大学拿了建筑的学士，对不对？然后后来呢到GSD 念了硕士，那后来在 GSD 也拿了博士。那在这个过程当中，其实傅云的跟一般我们在做建筑设计也蛮不一样，就是他现在是专门在做design research、design thinking， 还有做urban 的 development 的研究。那所以他投入的时间还蛮多是在research 这一块，然后还有在 critic 这一块。那所以目前在 GSD 也是担任了urban planning 跟 design 方面的 critic。要担任 critic 也不容易，因为像接下来有写书计划，或者是有这种蛮多是蛮仰赖是在发展一些新的思考的体系思想的体系。那我觉得这个在设计领域算是非常重要的一块，尤其在像 GSD 也蛮重视这件事情的。那今天非常高兴傅云带来在谈有关 half thinking 跟 half making 的这个角度就怎么样因为我们知道在建筑领域。大家都不能纯粹只有 thinking， 也不能纯粹只有 making， 那你必须都要去做，有点脚踏两条船，不知道这样讲对不对？就是对脚踏多条船，对。那我想这件事情在傅云的这个事务所也实践得非常的彻底。那当然今天另外就是也很高兴，这傅云的太太也随行。那文婷，也许大家等一下遇到有小朋友还有。文婷其实也很厉害她是
文婷更厉害，
对她更厉害，对，应该这么说。文婷她是念这个什么太空科学跟火箭的这方面的工程的，那后来也在 GSD 念的Design Technology， 那之前也在 Ideal 全球知名的设计公司，那目前是在 Microsoft， 也在做 Google 在做研发。所以一家人都非常厉害这样子。那跟我家一样，我是觉得我太太比较厉害的。好，那这样子我们接下来就欢迎傅云。
大家好。我觉得这样就可以吗？这样够近吗？
我怕线上的人听不到，如果不介意。
现在可以。Hello， 喂，
可能会有 echo。
没事。对。我觉得我还是说英文吧。我觉得说中文大家都很痛苦。 你们听的应该也很痛苦，我说的更 difficult 一点。不过 so thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I love meeting architects and I love speaking to architects. So I hope we can have a lot more time for our discussion after this. As the introduction said, my name is Yun. I am a design critic at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. And in addition to this, I'm also an architect and a partner of Semester Studio. We don't have a Chinese translation, but if I can try one, it would be something like 学习工作室, something like that. It's sometimes just confusing. People think we're just offering a class at a design studio, but it's okay. Our clients are not yet confused. And the studio is, we have 3 collaborators. It's myself, who does a lot of the talking, but probably less than half of the working. And then my partner in life, but also in work, is around here somewhere. I think she's walking around. And the third person, the baby is not our third partner. That's just our baby. He's not yet involved in our practice. But our third partner is Menace Liang, who was also a classmate of ours that we have worked together before. I think, as I said, the way that I would like to frame this particular talk today is, given that all of us are young architects, I think we're perhaps maybe 2 or 3 years ahead. And I'm very happy to serve as a canary of sorts. So you can see the kind of the difficulties and the navigations that we've had to do in our early career. Hopefully, when it comes time for you to start a practice, that you can avoid a lot of the challenges that we avoided, and to see, because I think we really are in a different kind of era, and a lot of the path that is traditional of the way to start a practice. You know, you begin with a small house, and then you do a large house, and you do a large office. I'm not sure if that path is still so available to us, or even so desirable, given kind of the range of global issues that we have to deal with in the next kind of 2 or 3 decades. But anyway, I hope that's the way I would like to frame it, to really share some of our recent and ongoing work. And I believe, or I think it's probably going to be a similar kind of spectrum to what we all have to work on in the next kind of 5 or 10 years. So our studio started really quite typically. We were classmates at school. Menace and actually had met earlier, again, as classmates in Australia. And we started working on some projects, even while we were students in school. Sometimes we conceal this fact to our clients, because, of course, it's not so convincing to have a group of students working out of their bedroom for their important build project. But you know, I think we got by. And I think in part of in part because of this start, we still try to, as much as possible, work like we did in our student days. You know, we aspire to very high concepts in our projects. We are very low in frills, very low on luxuries. We are very utopic, but we're also very pragmatic. We like to think that we're very rigorous, but we're also very lighthearted. Humor is something we try to bring to our work. As your boss mentioned, we often are very research-based in our projects, but also I think the core of the design is still very intuition-driven kind of thing for us. So I think compared to some of the other of our peers, one of the more unusual things is that all 3 of us are involved in schools or teach to some extent. And I think because of this, we work on a semesterly semesterly tempo. That's to say, we usually spend about 6 months a year thinking and doing research, teaching, and the other is kind of 6 months working more actively on our projects, traveling around. So this is what we're doing right now. We're trying to fly around where our clients and our projects are in Asia to convince them that we are real people and not just on Zoom, and that they're that when we build them, that the money is going towards real people. But there is also this very long tradition, I think, of artists and authors who are very conscious in kind of splitting their time between the work that they actually do and also the work and not working, basically, and really kind of spending time to think about things, to have a more open-ended exploration. I mean, one of our favorite kind of example is the Japanese author Haruki Murakami. So he's very famous for waking up at 4 a.m. in the morning. We don't wake up at 4 a.m. and it's much too early, I think, for designers. But he, writes and writes for about 5-6 hours, and then he doesn't write anything for the afternoon. He goes for a run and he comes back and listens to music. And I think to some extent we are aspiring to a similar kind of split, that a lot of these ideas that we encounter in practice really needs a little bit of time, open-ended time to unfold, and for us to be able to think about it in a more useful way, as opposed to kind of washing through with the speed of practice that we often have to deal with nowadays. And yeah, so for the last few years, that's to say, in the very short time that we have been working together, we seem to have managed this rather nice balance between thinking and making, and also because, in part because of this way that we have set up working, we also have produced a relatively a diverse range of outputs. On the left-hand side, you see we work on a range of projects that I think are more typical of the young practices. We like to think that we take the projects that interest us. Probably it's more like whoever is brave enough to trust us with their projects. We are happy to take them. But I think the reality is somewhere in between. And in addition to these projects that are more traditionally kind of architectural interior installations, we also write books. That one on the top end, in the middle, if I can do some advertising here, is coming out later this year. So please consider. Consider asking your school to fund the purchase of this book. We also write articles and kind of opinion pieces whenever issues arise, and of course we also teach quite actively across 2 or 3 schools at the moment. So I think today I would like to share with you 4 projects that we are kind of recently or currently working on. I was thinking a little bit about some of the gossip that we have around what architects, what much better known architects speak about usually. So there are the ones who never speak about their own work, but also about the larger global issues. And then there are the ones who are Swiss usually, who they never present projects that are yet to be built because they're Swiss, they're very secretive. So I think because of our stature, which is much lower, we're going to only share our projects, and a lot of them are not yet built, because that's, I think, some of our most interesting work, or at least is where a lot of our headspace has been recently. And these generally range from kind of small interior renovations, small housing projects, infrastructure, and also some kind of open-ended research. So, oh, that thing seems broken on the top. It's okay. I can see it here. So the missing image there is a syllabus from our design studio. So one of the kind of focuses for us recently, I think in the last kind of 3 or 4 years, is that we've been involved very much in the restructuring of the core architecture and urban design studio at the GSD. The program is a kind of a product of the 1960s, during that era when there was a really pressing need to reconstruct the cities, at least in the US and around Europe. And so it's a very recent program. And so every kind of 15 or 20 years or so, it needs to be rewritten in order to kind of deal with the important issues. Otherwise, we are still stuck in the times of urban redevelopment and kind of renovating historical districts. So in this most recent kind of iteration, one of the issues that we have foregrounded and really are working on is how do we deal with the increasing scale and closeness of infrastructure, 基本建设, something like that. Sorry for my poor translation. But so given kind of the range of phenomena that we have to deal with, our entry into the Anthropocene, our entry into kind of the effects of climate change, it's basically said that infrastructure is going to become a much bigger part of our life, especially our daily life. You know, infrastructure by definition, especially the old one, is that it's supposed to be underground, or at least kind of out of sight, out of mind. We're not supposed to recognize it. But I think one of the issues that we are going to deal with a lot in the next few decades is, as it comes closer and closer to our daily residential life, how can we make it so it's not a very technical and confusing thing? In fact, maybe infrastructure can be something that's much more intuitively understood, right? If you look at some of the infrastructure systems, it's kind of obfuscated by its technical aspect. Nobody really understands how it works. You just know it's there. So we think that it's very important that everybody should be able to understand. It's like you should be able to explain it to your grandma kind of argument. So around the same time, we were also asked to design a water tower for a new work-live campus outside Shanghai in Jiaxing, which was a very useful kind of testing ground for some of the experimental thoughts that we had about what is the role, what is the function, what is the new kind of posture that infrastructure should take. So, I mean, the water tower, I don't need to explain it here. It's a very familiar kind of part of our everyday infrastructure. You think about the ones in New York, for example, on the upper left-hand side. You also see the ones in Taiwan here, everywhere. But it's quite representative of our current, what's the word for it, kind of attitude towards infrastructure. It seems that we have accepted that it can look however it looks, very technical, and it doesn't really need to be related to the context, at least not in the aesthetic sense. And you look at the architecture, the buildings around us, even the most kind of carefully, most beautifully conceived ones, they don't seem to mind to have a shiny water tower on the top. I mean, it's fine, but it's quite, it's an interesting kind of thing if you think about it closely. But we would argue that it could be much more integrated and also easier to understand, a much funner part of everyday life. So we spent some time thinking about what is the meaning of a water tower. I mean, it's essentially just supporting a body of water in the air for later use. And we were reminded of this, I don't know, it's too short to be a poem, but this quote that a cloud is a lake in the sky, right? This kind of very intuitive, this very, we think, quite beautiful sentiment. So we thought very carefully about what is the form-making aspects of a cloud. What is it? What do we actually get out of it? And what is the form-making aspects, potentials of the rain? Looking at a lot of artwork. I mean, it's very useful in this case because artworks obviously are visual, so you have to draw it. And there are different ways of representing it. On the right-hand side is our very childish, I was saying that we always try to work as very naive students. So this is some of our very naive sketches for a water tower. And I mean, as you all know, oh, that's really blown out, but that's fine. So the water tower obviously has to be very tall. That's its basic function. It has to be taller than the tallest building that it serves to provide the water pressure. And so by default, it's going to be the tallest structure in a particular neighborhood. And so it's going to be kind of a natural wayfinding device. If people meet, if people try to locate themselves in this district in particular, which is a new industrial district, there's really nothing kind of that you can navigate yourself with. So we placed it close to the entrance of the particular campus, hoping that people, when they direct their clients or direct their friends, they can say, we can meet under this particular cloud. And we, in terms of the form making, we did something that I think is quite pragmatic. We took segments of the prefabricated water tank and basically recomposed it into this composite form, you can see. And so structurally, it's a little bit more labor intensive, obviously, than the typical one, but structurally it's improved because of the folds of the corrugation, and it's a little bit more difficult to see here. But one thing that we were really kind of focused on is to present as different impression from different directions as possible. So you see from some directions, you only see one of these sides. So it seems like a very fat shape, and from some other sides you see 4 or 5 segments, so it becomes a much busier kind of object. And in terms of the structure, which we obviously really challenged our structural engineer, we had worked with AKT2, who also work on a lot of Hadwick and Zaha projects, who also happens to be one of my doctoral advisors. So there is some benefit to having to soliciting your doctoral advisors there. But so we basically took the dimensions of the water pipe. So the water tower obviously needs to be connected by water pipes, 3 in this case, 2 going up, 1 coming down. Which is about a 15 centimeter diameter like this. And so we developed with the structural engineer a particular way to support the tower 30 meters in the air with just 15 of these columns. And you see they kind of lean against each other, they intersect at several points, and there are these crossbars that try to control the bending shape. So in the end, we were able to get something that we thought was a little bit, as light as possible for this particular context, which is more difficult than we anticipated. Especially looking at some of the other stuff that were built, but primarily because the head of the water tower obviously is very heavy. There's a large body of water there. For those people who are using it, who are kind of energetic enough, we also wanted to provide a way to get up there that's more than just a service ladder. So we composed this slightly serpentine route to go up. Not particularly for the view, but I think more for the possibility of reaching up there as a certain destination. And we did spend some time to think about what could be a possible program for this place. We haven't come up with a very satisfying one. We thought for a while that it could be like a smoking platform. It's like a cloud. It's a very poetic thing. It's not. Obviously, we're very against smoking. It's very unhealthy, so we cannot do that. We thought for a while that maybe it could be like a shower up there if people were adventurous enough, but you have to walk up and down while you were wet. So anyway, so we're thinking about that. So if you have any recommendations, please let me know. We're still contemplating this. Right. So besides the core studio, one of the classes that I teach in my own kind of area of interest is a course called Modern Housing in Urban Districts. And the kind of the issue that I try to use it to deal with is how do we kind of measure what is good housing and what is good design? And if you look back to the modern period, there's basically three large primary ways in which this is done. It's done by the real estate value, obviously, how much the housing cost. That's the typical one. It's sometimes done by its kind of economic productivity, right? A CBD somewhere, they produce a certain amount of economic produce per year. Or it's done by some version of critical acclaim. How many awards has it won? Who likes it? Which important critics have written about this? So those are really the 3 major ones. I would, and the impetus for this is that we think it's probably quite distant from our experiences in everyday life. It really doesn't matter how they measure up in terms of these numbers. It's something much closer to the way that we live. And so the class I've been using to, obviously I have to teach a class, but the student projects have been asking them to find new ways to assess what is good housing. So the students have come up with very interesting kind of metrics, including how many windows can you see in your house? Can you fit it? So a lot of our students live in very small apartments. Can you fit a sofa in your house? Is a very interesting measurement. How many cats can you fit in your house? That's another recent interesting project that we had. And to kind of begin with these things that are quite culturally nuanced and also much closer to our lived experiences, and to think about it in a very systematic way and how this potentially could inform design. So on the right-hand side is the context for a particular project that we had worked on recently. It's a very typical one for small studios, interior renovations for apartments. But we were really thinking about this in the longer lineage of these modernist apartment complexes, a lot of which we find in Asia today. It can trace its way somewhat back maybe to the Bauhaus period with Hilbesheimer and these figures who were doing these abstract concrete slabs. And of course, we know now that the typical way of dealing with these, which is to deconstruct them and to rebuild them, is not the way to go anymore. I mean, it's both for its kind of cultural design values, but also for its carbon footprint. In many parts of the world, this is something that you basically have to fix these up. And so we were thinking about this particular project in these ways, and to explore some of the ways of improving the quality of life, obviously, but without the capacity to expand the size of the housing or even its kind of real estate value significantly. The complex that we're dealing with is quite typical of these modernist blocks, slab blocks, north-south orientation. Very often it's integrated in schools. In fact, these modernist neighborhoods, as we know, usually are scaled around schools. It's so all your neighbors' children can go to the same primary school. And on the right-hand side, you see kind of these typical plans from this era, which is, it's all divided in this particular way, following the structural grid. Basically dealing with issues of minimal dwelling, how small can you make it in order to be still functional. And as part of this, there are two quite interesting traits that we found. One is that one window per room, obviously, because it's legally required, but no more, because any more would be like a luxury, then therefore unnecessary. And the second is that actually the second bedroom, so this one happens to be in Beijing, the second bedroom, it's almost impossible to fit a double bed. So it's for a single bed, a children's bed. And it speaks to kind of the tight fit of the housing types around the particular family structure, the one-child kind of family structure. And I think in dealing with these existing building blocks, these modernist housing types, what we're really dealing with is a particular vision of life, a particular kind of family structure. And so when we're renovating or restructuring it, we are essentially adapting it to our vision of contemporary life, which presumably is much more diverse and probably a little bit more different in terms of its emphasis. So what we decided to do, well, first of all, unlike a lot of the projects that we admire very much with the renovation of the historical projects, usually they extend out, and that gives you extra 2 or 3 meters to work with, and that's where a lot of the reshuffling happens. We like this experimental project in particular, where they build a bubble balcony, right? It's like everything is about extending out. But of course, when we work on an interior project, building out is not an option. So our option is really to build in slightly and to think about the periphery as a separate layer to mediate or to remediate the relationship between the inside and the outside. And I'm sorry again for the drawing here, but essentially what we did was a game of musical chairs, 大风吹, right? So all the rooms, they kind of take a shift around in order for us to find a more optimal arrangement of spaces, ideally kind of reflecting the amount of time that the residents spend in each of the rooms. So the bedrooms become much smaller, the guest bedroom becomes even smaller, the bathroom becomes slightly larger. But the most interesting part, interesting is a strong word for a small project. But I think one of the more evocative part is that we opened up this front part of the apartment. So for the very first time, you have 2 windows in the same room, which may be a very minor thing functionally, right? You can always get light from one window, but there is a sense of looseness, a loose fit between the life that's lived inside and the actual architecture, right? There is options. There's 1 or 2. One is for you to sit on, one is for you to move outside. And you also of course, are able to spend, they always spend a lot of time in this room, but now it's actually proportional to the area that it has in the apartment. So this roughly has 50% of the small area of the apartment, and which we think is a much more reasonable assignment of areas, given that they spend around half their time in the apartment in this particular space. One of the tricks, or one of the design games that we were playing, is to emphasize or to kind of reprogram the windows. So kind of in the same legacy as the apartments built around very strict functionalist lines, is that the windows are as small as possible at the time, basically. So whatever were the standard dimensions of the window, it's the balcony door is as small as you can get out. So we created these new frames around it. We painted the inside white. We have these kind of curtains. So there is somehow the illusion of the window perhaps being slightly larger than they are, but certainly much more functional. You know, some are for sitting, some are for accessing. And on the other side, we also created, we organized the program around these other illusion windows. Let's say, you know, some are for books because, you know, books are the windows to something. You know, a frame in particular for the tea room, and basically trying to expand the sense of spaciousness in this otherwise quite a compact space. And here's just some more photos. We were really kind of interested in each of the organizing the programs of the apartment around these frames so that it's not a traditional kind of open plan, which is very popular, but of course now is having a lot of criticisms, but to try to have zones of activities around this otherwise very open space. Oh, what did I want to talk about here? Let's see. Oh, yes. So another one of my roles is that I am involved in the Joint Center for Housing, which is one of the think tanks institutes that we have at the university, primarily for American housing. But I have recently been working with them on one of my own kind of pet interests, pet theories, which is that there are, I think, many contexts that have over time evolved a distinctive and very comfortable lifestyle, right? And some of them seem to have been able to articulate it, to kind of frame it in a particular where it becomes almost a exportable design product. So I'm thinking, for example, about Scandinavian design. You know, when people buy it, they're really buying into a certain vision of a lifestyle. You know, happy children, good social services, and of course the wooden architecture and the wooden furniture comes as part of this thing. And you know, the Danish and the Scandinavian designers, they benefit enormously from this. We also think about Japanese design, right? It's a particular sensibility, really, but also an economic model. Think about Muji, for example. They're selling you this idea that you know, good enough is enough, and so you know, why does it matter that your table is not waterproof? You know, just be careful, and the table is beautiful. It's a cardboard table, but they can also sell it for a more affordable price because of this readjusted kind of expectation of what life should be. So here are some of the books that we have been reading as we're thinking about this. Kenya Hara, Designing Japan, How to Be Danish, and we're particularly interested in this topic in relation to New Zealand, which is where I'm from. So I would argue that New Zealand actually has a very distinctive lifestyle that has emerged in the past few decades, but it's yet to be kind of articulated. And my interest in kind of New Zealand as a place really emerged a few years ago when we had Bernard Latour, who is one of these climate philosophers, come to speak. And his basic argument is that the core reason why we have a lot of these climate issues is that even though we all live on the same planet, we really have very different ideas of what the planet is. So for some people, it's organized around countries. For some people, it's organized around oceans and climatic zones. And for some people, they have an escape route, right? It's like he's really talking about the Silicon Valley crowd. You know, so there's fires in the forest, and they have no water, and it's very hot, and everything's terrible. But for them, it's not really an issue because I think somewhere deep down, or he thinks somewhere deep down in their mind, they think they have an escape route. I mean, to where? Who knows? Like to Mars or something. But you know, what he said in the lecture was that, you know, it's almost like they can escape to Mars or to New Zealand. And then I suddenly thought, oh, New Zealand is this kind of, you know, it's more interesting than I thought it was. There is this utopian kind of aspect that that I think people have ideas about this place from the outside. You know, ideas about the unspoiled nature that you can go camping in. A lot of ideas comes from the movies Lord of the Rings, right? That's basically where a lot of our nationalist branding come from. But essentially, the country there is just it's a large suburb. You know, there's a lot of wooden houses in forest and hills and mountains in a natural setting that may or may not be quite well looked after, but it's very sparse. And so we're very interested in kind of thinking about how to articulate this as a cohesive design aesthetic and vision as something that can be kind of exported. So we're also around the same time working on a small house there. We call it the co-living garden shed. It's really a post-pandemic kind of new housing typology for the suburbs. And we imagine it as a place where people can kind of work and live together, not necessarily belonging to traditional family structure, but in a much more flexible way. And kind of working with the local construction systems, wooden frames usually, we try to deconstruct and recompose the typical house into a kind of a looser arrangement so that you don't have, the master bedroom where the most important people live, and then you have the small bedrooms, but something much more flexible. And the bedrooms can become offices, the offices can become bedrooms, the outside can become kind of more actively used. And so it's also next to a historical forest, which we find quite interesting. But there is this kind of open and closeness that we were very interested in exploring in order to change the characters of the place. Sometimes it can be open enough to become a kind of internal market almost. Sometimes it's so close it's basically like a fortress. And also the clients happen to travel very frequently, so we imagine as a place that can be locked up very easily whenever they're away. That plan is really not turned out well here. Okay, anyway, let me paint you a word picture. So this is a very beautifully drawn plan here. But essentially we were trying to avoid the use of hallways. I mean, this is something that we got from historical buildings. So we really wanted the building to avoid any hallways, and it's more about the connection of rooms. So even the hallways, whenever you need it, becomes a small room that can take on a program in and of itself. And there's usually more than one way to get from one place of the house to another. So if you have if you have an argument, we're trying to work with a more flexible way of living. If you have an argument with your roommate, there's a way to avoid them while you get to the kitchen or something like that. And then most of the living quarters, the private quarters, are up above. And we imagine in something much more like a treehouse. So very private above, below is a very loose kind of soup. Oh, that's really not turned out. Okay, there is an image in the center there that you cannot see. But on the top is Alvar Aalto and sitting in one of his furniture. So, and on the bottom is the forest. So related to kind of this project, we are also thinking about not just the architectural skill, but also the possibility of products, basically. So New Zealand is a very major kind of, for its size.
Allow me.
Oh yeah, go for it.
You can adjust.
Yeah, no problem, go for it.
Contrast sign.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm happy to keep on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, someone just turned up.
No problem. But everybody knows Alvar Aalto, right? And what he did for the Finnish economy. So the Finns, they have these trees which are not traditionally used for furniture. Oh yes, there we go, perfect. So this is called the toaster chair because you can slot these cushions in there. So I mean, the Scandinavian context is very interesting for us because we really think they have done something that's quite extraordinary there. A lot of people live however they live there, but somehow they were able to put this together, with the contribution with poets, with historians, with theorists to really coalesce this together. And of course, one of the central figures was Alvar Aalto in this design, right? There's a kind of role of agency for the designer as a big contributor. But he essentially developed a new furniture system that can use the local timber. And it was so kind of economically significant for the country's productivity that he's on their money bill, right? And on their, I think, $100 Euro Finnish bills, it's a very rare kind of thing for a designer, for an architect. So New Zealand also is a very major timber producer. 1% of the world's timber comes from New Zealand, which is quite big for a small country. But at the moment, it's kind of sold in a very loose way, in the way that it's using its natural resources, of using tourism. People go there for the clean air, for the open spaces, not really for the design. The timber also is often being sold as raw products for paper, right? It's not really, there's no design added value to it. So together with this house, we have some opportunities to design interior furniture for it, and we're very interested in exploring a certain kind of new language for furniture that can use the local timber, which is pine. So pine is one of the harder softwoods, so it's possible to use for furniture, but it's not super sturdy. And so you see a lot of the structural elements have to be much chunkier than the ones that we're usually familiar with. And we're trying to kind of think about what it means for a residential environment, which usually prizes lightness and thinness. And try to build it into something that's more usable, but of course, something that can be produced with this particular material. Oh, so now we're at the last of our of the projects that I hope to share with you. So how should I enter this? Let me think. So there's two kind of impetuses for this particular project. One is that I think in the North American setting, there is always a strong gravitation towards Italy, at least in our part of the world, as kind of the urban ideal. So I teach in the architecture and urban design program. And so if you sit in one of our reviews, it often goes something like this. The student would present a project, it would have plazas, apartments, something like that, parks. And then one of the reviewers would come up and they would, they would say, oh, this is very nice, but but does it have a soul? I was in Rome just last month and I was sitting, I was drinking coffee on the plaza and, the sun was like this and then, that's life, you should have some of that kind of feeling in your projects, which I, as a very junior kind of faculty, I find it interesting. I find it useful because it pulls the conversation away from kind of very strict functional focuses, right? I mean, these things are important, the quality of life, the people's feeling in these spaces. But at the same time, I would argue that it's not precise enough. It's very difficult for the students to kind of act on, right? What do they take away? What do they do with this comment? If they have been to Italy, maybe maybe they felt the same feeling and they can try to work on it a little bit. But if they haven't, you're kind of dead in the water. So my partners and I, we started to get very interested in this, and interested in whether there was a possibility to kind of offer a new vocabulary that could allow people to discuss these things, that things that we think are kind of effusive and impossible to discuss, but in a more precise way, at least in a design kind of setting, so that we can use it as observations. And the second kind of impetus for this is that we really wanted a holiday. My partners and I, this is at the end of a lot of project, do a holiday is to turn it into a work project. So we basically applied for some fellowship funding to do a research project in Rome. And of course, there has been a long kind of tradition also, at least in the European countries, for artists to take a year off in Rome to regain their creativity. So in the bottom there is Cy Tumley, the painter, who also went there and lived and started making his best work there. And in the middle there is one of our favorite industrial designers, George Nelson. He was the head of Herman Miller for a little while. And it's very interesting because, so I had applied to the British school because I'm from New Zealand, part of the Commonwealth, but Wenting had applied to become a visiting artist at the American Academy in Rome. So that's the American version of it. So this particular, Nelson also was at the American Academy, and Wenting and Nelson shared the same studio. They were kind of assigned the same studio spaces, which we thought was very interesting. And on the right-hand side is just, what people speak about the wonderful street life of Rome that we see here. So, I mean, this is kind of half a holiday, half a research project, half kind of thinking. And we were very conscious that a lot of the core of the thing that we want to study, this feeling of moving smoothly through the city, kind of being inspired, not really going anywhere, being very relaxed, is something that resists a very rigid studies, right? You can't think about it too hard because then it becomes work, and this is definitely the opposite of work. And so we thought very carefully about how do you kind of study this in a very rigorously lighthearted way. And what we resolved to do is that every day, so let me point to this. So the British Academy is somewhere about here, and then the American Academy is somewhere about here. And the British Academy, we were living there, and they have better dinners. And then the American Academy had better lunches. So you see they have these very interesting lunches sitting in the lodges. So basically every day we wake up, we have our coffee, and then we would like stroll through the historical city, not really using a map, to just letting our kind of senses take us wherever we would go. But basically ending up in the American Academy by lunchtime, and we have lunch there, have some conversations, do a little bit of work, because we have a studio space, we have to work there. And then about in the afternoon, we're like, oh, I think we should get back to dinner. And then we start walking, and so again, wandering through the city to get back to dinner time. But this kind of daily ritual, this kind of looseness, I think allowed us to explore a lot of our own intuitions and observations about how people kind of navigate and move through a city, not just in the physical environment, but also correspondingly in our mind, right? I mean, we know that the kind of environments really affect the way that we think. If it's a very loose environment, you think in a more loose way. And on the way, one of the things that we did was take a lot of photos of how people are kind of hanging out in the city, readapting a lot of the structures that were not originally intended for people to relax on. And another way that we try to document and investigate our thoughts is that we just picked up pieces of bits and bobs as we were moving through the city. Sometimes there's like the orange things that fences dangerous things, so we cut a little bit of that. There's some pasta, there's some kind of stones, but it's really supposed to be, it's supposed to function as mementos, as like ways for us to remember what we were thinking about when we collected these particular objects. As opposed to writing them down in a very focused way, because we thought at the time that would really that kind of seriousness means that we would lose whatever we were trying to grasp. And so one of the things that we did is that we started collecting these objects across these two large dining tables that were identical in dimensions to the lunchtime dining table. So there was a lot of conversation, and we imagined in a way that when we have a conversation with the other artists who are at these things, it's really like taking a walk through the city, but in your mind. So we thought this could be like a kind of a landscape for the mind to wander through the city, and we can talk about, we found this thing here, and we're thinking about whether that's nice, and found this thing here. And this is the studio space that we got. It's very tall, 3 stories. It's where the old sculptors, they used to do like, the men on horses sculptures, the really large ones, and they have to have a space to make it and take it out. And so we thought it's particularly interesting that now we make these really miniature, tiny models in one of the taller spaces they have in the institution. So at the end of these fellowships, they have the mostra, which is basically an exhibition with all the artists' work. We have a painter of cats, or like that happened to be around the same time. So we produced this piece, which is really like a reinterpretation of the table that we were working on. Some ready-made found chairs supporting this table surface, and on the table surface are the objects, and then there are these kind of little figurines walking through them, thinking about different things. And of course, when you sit on the chairs, the elevated height of the table means that you're really at around the eye level as the little figurines, and you're really walking in the same kind of landscape, even though you're in a very different dimension. And actually, we through this experience, we had more time to reflect on what the observations are and what were some of the design strategies that actually may be implemented when we go through a kind of design process. So we have kind of 5 major categories that we thought were particularly important, or at least were shared by the spaces that we generally find interesting or inspiring. And these were some of the little diagrams that we worked on to go down. So there's about 6 of these, let's say, memos for each of these observations. So we're now in the process of maybe developing these either into a design class, which I think would be very fun, but I think later on into a publication. All right, that's the end. Thank you.
接下来可以开放大家来问一些问题，不用那么的拘谨，或问要非常非常正式，或也许接下来我们可以来问对富云的从事务所啦，然后甚至教学啦，或者是project 啦这些，也许都可以来提问。
这个我开一点。
OK， 这有点 echo， 把它关小一点。
See, he has all the fun toys.
哇！
要他 hard。
来，同学们有没有？有什么问题？ 在这边比较多的是 MR1 的同学吧，
很好，
对不对？应该几乎
我也是 MR1 的同学。
对，那个是 MR1 的同学，对。然后有 MS 的同学。
什么？
那你大学有？
对，我大学就学建筑
对，对啊，那你
是学
AP Advanced Standing，right？
AP 对 AP，对。哦
MR1 AP。
对，我当时在上学的时候，澳洲正在进行那个教育改革，所以原来5年可以读到的，我们那个就是大概有1-2年，那个3年就可以。类似就大概读到，好像就也没有很正式，不过当时我们就想说3年就好，然后就赶快跑出来了，然后对，
就念 AP 这样，
所以就可以稍微就是快了1-2年，对。
OK。或者同学还没有来，我们是不是大白或 David？
同学先。
同学先。
好啊。就刚刚你有说，就是你从那个纽西兰去找到一些生活的风格啊，或者是重新给他一些定义，他想把它带到你的就是建筑的空间的创作里头，这样子，这也是一个好像从家乡找到能量的另外一种过程。那我有点好奇说，那你会怎么看台湾？因为你不算说真的很多时间在台湾，但是也是蛮长，因为家人的关系回来的。然后我有点好奇说，你的角色看我们台湾的话，我们好像没有纽西兰这么好像美好的 image。
很美好啊。
对，但是就有一点好奇，那你会怎么看这件事情？如果我们现在的创作者或同学们也在试图同时也能够找到一些在地的讯号或在地的一些元素的时候，你会有什么样的建议或你的观察可以分享的？
我觉得这个有几个不同的切入点，当然从自己的环境、自己的所谓这种家乡、自己的那种小时候的记忆，找到一些设计的灵感，应该是一个很常见的事情。我觉得我们比较觉得有趣的是，有一些地方 collectively 一群人，不止设计师，也许有一些历史学家，有一些做理论的，有一些作者拍电影的，他们可以在一段时间里面 articulate 一个地方作为一个 sensibility， 然后这个 sensibility 是可以被 share 的，它是可以被出口的，就是商业上 literally 是可以被出口的。然后我们也知道，设计行业其实相对上是一个，是一个地方喜欢的行业。我们就是除了就是咖啡喝的比较多以外，其实也不太污染。然后你知道，大家就是在做模型啊，画图。然后，所以对一个这个经济体系是一个很好的一群人。然后就是比如说现在荷兰一些那个什么那个丹麦，他们就是有一个就相对上以他们这个小的国家有很大的这个设计产业，所以这个东西对他们整个经济体系是非常有帮助的。然后很多地方都有很鲜明的这种生活特色，可是这个当地的生活特色跟它真正卖出去的东西其实不见得一模一样。我们也知道北欧其实他们生活上也有很多矛盾，可是他们在 articulate 在这个时候，它不就是这个东西不是这个一部分，就是它像，可是也不见得是一样像。然后，所以我们 interest particularly， 比如说那个早期2战后有那个就是现代意大利设计，现代德国设计，他们原来真的是不太有这个东西，可是后来就被 articulate 出来是有这个东西。然后其中一个比较有趣的这个故事就是，比如说德国车，他们是怎么样 project 这个reputation of reliability， 当然他们这个工程本身要进步很多嘛。可是其实有一群人他们在研究这个关车门的时候，是不是感觉很重？就是你知道嘣这一声，就这个somehow就是 research 上来说是人对这个车子的这个 quality 最 direct 的这种 experience， 所以他们真的是有一群人在研究这东西，或者像什么那个日本车，他们这个 button 是有人在研究的。我觉得就是它这个东西可以把这个，所以早期比如说那个40-50年代这个意大利那个德国设计之后，日本也做了类似的这种转型嘛，然后那个之后。 比如说韩国也做类似的转型。我觉得现在比较有趣的地方，那个新西兰是因为我从那边来，所以我觉得那边挺有趣的。我觉得台湾是其中一个这种，可能未来如果它可以被 consolidate articulate 出来，它可以是一个很有特色、很鲜明的这个design brand。这是一个可以被出口的东西，当然它出口是建筑出口，还是产品出口，还是城市设计、城市规划出口，这个就都可以。然后其他的，比如说，但是它不需要是国家，所以比如说可能美国的一些州，他们开始有一些自己很特别的这个生活方式，他们也可以有一个当地的这个设计体系。然后当然有这样的话，对我们那个设计师有很多好处，因为你就是比如说你想卖城市设计的人，他们只要比如说就是在哥本哈根的城市设计师，你就让客户来城市看看，这么多人骑脚踏车是不是很好呀？你不想你们城市的人也是骑脚踏车吗？那你就是让我们做设计就可以了，这样子。我觉得台湾也是有类似的优点，就是你知道这边有一个生活的这种状态，然后我不知道它本身是什么样的就是这种 medium 是最好的 articulate 方式，可是比如说他们来看，觉得这边生活状态很好，吃的很好吃，那就是这个东西是设计可以卖出去的。
来，同学，
就是顺着刚刚的问题，就是刚刚老师在讲这个设计跟 lifestyle 跟这些东西这些的关系的时候，我在想台湾的 lifestyle 是比较就我们习惯的一种生活跟的城市的状态，或者生活或者居住的状态，是一种比较不被控制的。对，所以这件事情好像跟某种程度产生了台湾好的生活状态，但某种程度好像这件事情就会跟我们习惯的设计产生一个很大的 gap。对，那我不确定说这件事情老师有没有？
你讲的是 freestyle。
也可能是 freestyle， 或者是一种 lose control， 或者是一种不想要在一个 control 中间。对，但因为最近也常常在想说，设计师习惯要 control 在一个状态，它才是我们提供的一个不知道状态嘛。但台湾某一种程度，我们因为我一直都在台湾生活嘛，那我们某种程度喜欢台湾的生活，是因为它的 lose control。对，是有一种这种感觉，所以我不太确定说这件事情。
所以你在问的是有关于设计师可以去服务的机会，
要怎么样在这样
机会上是
状态下，
不然这样就设计师没有机会可以去服务这样的意思。
我觉得好像有点这样，就台湾的设计师会一直觉得很不知道怎么出手，就是我喜欢这状态，但我又要在某种 control 下去让它之类的，不知道模糊的问题，不好意思。
不会，没有，我觉得台湾的这个 example 是挺 interesting， 因为我们其实一开始对这个东西产兴趣的，就是经验就是我们，就是我觉得我自己挺爱吃的，然后我觉得我对一个地方的这个印象有没有好吃的影响特别大，就是 unreasonably 大。比如说什么有一家比较好吃的什么那个小面店，我就觉得说哦，大概会多比如说5%就愿意搬到这个地方，就非常非常不合理，就怎么可以就是1/20的这个决定就是在这一家小的面店的。然后我们那个就之前在那个就度暑假的时候去了一个那个就是 croissant 法国面包特别好的地方，然后我们当然就每天吃这东西，然后我就边吃我们就在想，就是这东西它 lose， 可是它也不 lose， 就是如果你现在是这个城市的市长，或是你的这个规划长，你要怎么样可以设计出来一个好的 croissant？ 就这个城市怎么样才可以有10间很好的面包店可以做出这东西？就这不是一个很，就是这是可以做到的事情，可是这没有很直接。就是你当然可以就是什么找一些年轻的学生送去什么巴黎，然后就强迫他们回来开面包店，这是一种。可是这个不会很成功的。就是可是你也可以就是比如说 开始 encourage 这种 urban life， 你可以 encourage small businesses， 你可以让大家的这个，比如说上班交通变短，大家都走路上班，路上可以买点什么吃。这个东西是，就它是可以在这个环境设计里面是可以做到的。然后，所以这个是我们当时开始想这个东西的一部分。然后我觉得你刚才说这个，就是台湾它这个比较 independent、比较 democratic 这种生活状态，它一部分可能是可以反映在这个就是设计里面，它不见得是一个很就它不见得是一个1:1的 correlation， 不是说你这个环境很 loose， 你的这个设计是很 loose， 就是设计它就是 design has to be whatever it needs to be in a particular context， 它其实就是在解决一些问题，然后这些问题呢，它反正我们另外一套那个在想的东西就是比较关于 design thinking， 不过每个环境里面基本上就是有一套问题，比如说有我不知道10个大的。那至于你是怎么去解决这些问题，就是其实挺 flexible 的。你可以在城市设计上去解，比如说那个室外空间，这个是一个很简单的问题嘛，大家都想要室外空间。你是在城市规划上就把公园规划好，还是你是让每一个人的家里面都有花园，还是你是让每一个公寓里面都有阳台，还是你是让每个人家里都有摆盆栽的地方？就它可以是从城市到建筑到景观到这个产品的这个设计，就是某程度上当然是越早解决越好，不过完全解决也是可以的。所以我觉得你刚才说这个东西，它也许就是它这些问题的解决的次序跟其他地方不太一样，它不见得是在城市规划上一定要像欧洲城市一定要先解决什么再解决什么，也许在这个地方是反过来的。
对啊，如果 7-Eleven 就是我们的 infrastructure 的话，那其实我们做得不错。
多好啊 ！7-Eleven 就是一个 amazing 的
infrastructure。
infrastructure。
没有的，我们晚上没有这种地方买东西。
是一个 infrastructure， 真的很好用。
你这样想可能就觉得还行。
是。刚刚讲的这个 looseness， 有一点松散的这个余裕的可能性，在设计里面创造这样的可能，让人可以 wondering， 像在罗马一样，就这个在台湾我现在一个学生用了一个词儿叫 irregularity， 它不是正好是 regularity 的相反，它只是说那个这个松的程度，那它是在形容台湾的这个某种城市里面的架构，或者是我们面对法律的各种状态都有这种irregularity， 就可以有很大的灰色的空间。I sort of like 那个这个他提出来这个词儿，那个我就要跟你说一下。
蛮像，
蛮好的一个词。
而且法律是个好的。
法律比较清楚，因为法律是写下来的嘛，你是可以去那个 close reading 这个东西研究出来的，对。就是建筑环境上其实也是可以研究出来的。比如说我们当时就是这些我们自己觉得一些那个，就是在罗马找灵感，就是一个欧洲人就是历史上常有的东西。有些东西就是在这种很严谨的那个北欧国家，德语系国家就是想不出来，他们非常 functionally driven， 就是该说什么就说什么，他没有这个灰色地带，没有办法有这种就是 early stage ideas 可以就是让他在那边浮一浮。那个 maybe later 他们可以 develop 成一些就是自己的 idea， 可是他没有的话就不太行。所以对 anyway 我们觉得这个是至少是罗马的一个自己的特色。不过估计就是台湾 I think is also part of， 就是有些这些 quality， 他们我觉得在那个比如说早期的这个现代主义，他们有一个自己的 vision of what is good design， 跟这种 efficiency 跟 functionalism 是非常非常 closely tied together 的。可这个东西它是一个 conceptual 上的追求，它不见得是一个 always 很 useful 的东西。然后我也觉得，就是我觉得什么不重要，不过，就是过去比如说那个10-20年比较多的这种 literature， 在研究不同的这种 design context， 我觉得有一个比较大的 theme， 就是 我们在 rediscover 有一些被现代主义否定掉的东西，然后尤其是很多像什么那个亚洲啊、那个东南亚啊、那个大西洋这种地方，他们有一些本身自己的那个思考方式其实是有用的，然后他们当时在就是等于是被那个就是被 silence 一阵子，然后我们现在就 rediscover 它的 usefulness 。OK。
那个 maybe 在你不介意我再问一下
没问题
吧？你认识 Lars Lehrer 吗？
我大概知道这个人。
不，那另外一个就不可能认识了 ，Noble Shoes。那我会举这两个，就这两个北欧，原来是北欧。那 Lars 也好，或者是Noble Shoes 写 Mini Western Architecture 啊，他们都超爱地中海，尤其是南欧意大利，取的这个，那所以对他们来讲，那个北欧的这种状态在南欧会被释放出来，也许就是你在罗马感觉到，或者是忍不住连接刚刚 Brian 说的跟你说的。那我往下要谈一下这个事情，这个30个found object 放在 table 上，组成一个关于穿越罗马，而且每天走的路不太一样的状况的一个这个 collectiveness 的shall I say 那个multiplicity 一种 multiple 的状态，是我觉得 semester studio 里面有的一个状态。如果你不介意，我再说一下。
当然好了。
对，像那个什么，刚刚的那个 One House， 这个等等啊，不是 One House， 刚刚那个在纽西兰。
哦，对，那个小 courtyard， 对。
对，那包括房间之间的关系，然后墙围起来变成一个整体，然后或者是 One House， 就是比较早的那个semester studio，我觉得很有趣。它在 reorganize 的时候，怎么让对不起，如果你们好奇的话，就上那个 semester studio 的网站。那最明显的是，譬如说，刚刚是 co-living garden share， 是 table room for 8，或者是 ring swing， 或者是one half garden house。我先用那个 table room for 8， 它8个各有一个 singularity。But I like the fact that 你用一个平面把它整在一起，然后人跟人之间的关系是那个 multiplicity 呈现的地方。是我觉得 semester studio 里面的 project 谈一个人跟一群人之间的关系，那允许有那个 singularity。Maybe I'm reading too much into it，但是它同时又谈一个 collectiveness， 在一个那个房间里。And I really like that. It's 在我看那些 project 的时候，这个就是 semester studio 的 beauty。再一次，那个 ring swing 也是。在澳洲也好，不管那个地方在哪里，你放那个东西在因为你的这个 presentation 里面有几个不同的地方，那每一个人在荡的同时，它要围绕起来，那同时又有一个 syntax 关于这。I like that a lot. In a way， 你semester studio 你这个3个人怎么工作的我不晓得，但是那个如果这个是一个 metaphor 或者是一个这个比喻的话，就是你们当中的这个对话跟你们对那个世界的想象的那种这个个别存在的 singularity 跟那个collectiveness， 在同一个房间里面，在同一个世界里面，让我觉得很好。那是我在看 semester studio 的时候的感觉，包括今天你的这个几个 project 都有特别那个倾向。
对，我觉得不止一个人一起工作，当然是一个 particular 状态，它 maybe contribute to 这种 quality in 这些 work。我觉得另外一个就是我们自己觉得喜欢做一些比较就是 timely， 就是反映我们现在生活的这种项目。然后我记得之前有一个人跟我说过，就是大概跟我年纪类似，比如说比我大几岁的，就是我们只能给我们的 peer， 我们的这些类似年龄的人做，就我们最好的项目一定是给这些人做，因为我们最了解他们的 生活状态，所以当时他那个 advice 是说，你就不用很急着做很大的项目，比如说我们从年龄层现在买不起房子，就只能买些 apartment 做些内装，那你就先做些内装项目，然后到时候小孩子开始那个上幼儿园了，那你就做些小幼儿园项目，然后他们到时候变成老板了或者什么时候你再开始做一些大的，这个是就是这种东西，它就是一步一步，大概就是跟着你的自己这个年纪就慢慢做，然后我觉得这个也给了我们这种就是这种 make haste slowly 的这种感觉，就是我们就反正我们觉得比如说就是做这种设计，就是这种速度我们觉得做的最好，所以我们就慢慢做，然后那个什么年纪就做到什么设计。不过我觉得就跟这个比较就是反映现代生活这个部分，我觉得我们现在跟未来那个这个就是我们这个工作年龄里面20-30年比较需要 deal with 的其中一个 thing 就是自从21世纪初的这个就是这种大的这个 demographic shift away from the nuclear family, away from 这种 particular vision of what the family structure should be. 就是现在当然我们都知道很多家已经不是就是一个夫妻，然后几个孩子几只狗什么这种东西，就是生活状态就是比较 loose 比较这种，然后我觉得这些 quality 应该主要是反映这个的，然后有一个比较那个我们自己喜欢看的书叫做那个 liquid modernity， 就是它当然是有点过头，不过他就说现代人的生活，现代人的这种关系就是跟就是一体一样，就是非常 fluid。我觉得它某程度上是有一些 truth in 这个 quality， 它的这个 observation， 然后我们也我不知道是不是这么 directly apply， 不过这些 quality 应该是 come from 这些那个 observation。
有线上的问题。那个他们其实同学，有个团队叫51 North 4E，
我好像听过。
5141 North 4 East， 他们是以 infrastructure 为研究主题，想说你对他们有没有什么看法？觉得自己的团队在对于 infrastructure 的看法的做法啦，跟他们有什么不一样的地方？
哇，这么 difficult。是那北欧公司吗？还是那个瑞士公司？
看一下，
我不知道我们能不能够现场那个想到这东西。对，我是看过他们的东西。我觉得做 infrastructure 是一个比较 contextual 的adaptation。我觉得每个地方对 infrastructure 的要求跟他们认为应该是由谁来做很不一样。有些地方当然就是政府承包这个东西，有些地方是工程公司。只有我不知道是不是少数，不过有一些地方当然是可以是设计主导的。我不知道我们现在工作的这个地方是不是一个主要设计主导的地方。不过这也 raise 了一个挺 interesting 的这种issue， 就是我在那个教书的一部分当然是做那个城市设计，然后城市设计项目呢常常是跟 infrastructure 有关系。infrastructure 项目很大 ，infrastructure 项目呢非常少给年轻公司。所以，我们其中一个比较就是跟我们本身已经没有什么关系了。不过我自己的 curiosity 就是，大的 infrastructure company 他们怎么起家的？谁第一个给一个小公司一群年轻人做就是大的这种那个基本建设项目的？我们大概认识几个，就是 mid career 那个在美国他们是有一个 path， 不过这个 path，要有一些比较特别的机会。
我觉得也跟这是我没有任何很仔细的根据，可是跟时代有关系。我的意思是60年代、70年代，在Reagan 以前，当所有的这个事务所 不只是 boutique 跟 corporate， 中间还有非常多的时候，有很多的可能性。那个时候的 infrastructure 很多是 engineering office 做的，即使是 architectural
是
那但是 as it evolve， 尤其是 in the 80s，all these 公司之间的这个大并小啊等等，就 evolve 成现在很大的公司，and winners takes all， 他们就逐渐的我们就拿不到，顶多是有一种 A， 我们都知道 AE office，architecture engineering office， 所以我觉得越来越难，那但是呢？
不过这种是那种 hard infrastructure， 我觉得一部分就是我们现在对 infrastructure 的这种 definition 也越来越宽。比如说，我非常认同 7-Eleven 是一个 infrastructure， 这个东西就是不是一个大的工程公司能够自己 handle 的，它其实是一个比较小、比较 loose， 是需要很多这种 design sensibility 在里面的。
我正要讲的就是恰恰你说的，大概在过去10年中，我觉得台湾有另外一群年轻的建筑师，而且很棒的建筑师开始出现。那其中一个，譬如举个例子来讲，是辜达奇，也是我们的。那他做的 infrastructure 是在旧的这个 community 里面，本来是一个 backyard， 然后他为他们做了一个这个是可以打篮球的 facility，那这种就已经是对于那个 community 里面所需要的一个 infrastructure。那也因为大的那种 hard infrastructure， 还有这种 building， 都被这些大的建筑事务所拿走了。比如说，所以过去10年那个 Young Taiwanese Architect 可以起来的都是做这些 project， 有的甚至很小，像是学校的改建，但是他们做得很好，所以我认为刚刚提到的，这是我的观察，跟我这一代完全不一样。他们这个他们这一代会很有趣的，属于可能是台湾这么小的地方又很小 ，resources 都被大的人拿走以后的这个小的这个建筑，年轻的一代的这些会出来，这新的 sensibility 所创造，而且很特别。香港呢，逐渐也在过去5年左右，起码在2次，我在当他们这个annual architecture award 就是每隔5年，找我一次的话，前一次跟去年的就很不一样，新的年轻建筑师也出来了，有很多做那种很小的项目，是跟 community 的这个 soft infrastructure 在一起，我觉得很值得看。我也很期待，就是下一次如果早一点回来，我们来 organize 一个Young Architect Talk 的 marathon， 有点像很 Zurich 那种，you know，或者是这个叫做什么catch up。Anyway， 我觉得你会很有趣，跟那个跟台湾这年轻的一代，我觉得很值得期待。跟以前的不太一样。Anyway，
来看看后面的同学，放眼望去还没有。那如果没有的话，
我只是好奇再追问一个，你怎么 shift gear between writing a thick book on Korean Korean modern, right? Modernism, but in Korea and Southeast Asia and all these projects. How do you shift gear? I'm just curious. 但是我很好奇了。
有很好的 collaborator。
我那个非常不一样的 sensibility. I'm very impressed.
是。
Right. 那是不是就谢谢傅云？
谢谢。
希望之后我们有这个可以待久一点。
好呀。
的时间，
我也很希望。
或者是早一点，然后我们就可以 organize 一个这样的，顾大奇啊等等啊，那个蔡家豪老师啊，
对，
那个又比分，蔡家豪做那些米行啊那些，其实
蛮好。
哦呀，
很可以跟傅云这个
有一些类似。
我觉得有好几个。
好，
赶快。